Chapter 7. Back Home. I had departed from Afghanistan in a stupor of medicated pain, knowing nothing of my surroundings except as images from a bad dream. I had not looked out the windows even once as we flew away. When I came back, however, I was sitting up and feeling quite okay. My senses were alert. I could pay attention to everything going on around me. The plane had many passengers, traveling for different reasons. I was just another passenger, lost in my thoughts, struggling with my mixed emotions, missing Germany already, looking forward to seeing my family, feeling all tingly at the thought of seeing my familiar childhood surroundings again. Suddenly, the pilot announced that we had crossed the border and were flying over Afghanistan now. I looked down and saw nothing but mountaintops, pointy-looking black, blue, and gray rock, puckered into endless jagged tip-tops sharp as nails. It was summer now, but snow had already dusted most of those peaks, or else the snow had not yet melted from last year. Those mountains looked beautiful, I must admit. They pulled at my heart and tightened my breath, but the sight of them disturbed me too. Where were the cities and towns of Afghanistan? Where were the villages even? And did my country have no farms? When we left Germany, looking down from the air, I saw great green squares of cultivated land stretched side by side and end to end, as far as my eye could see in some places. Flying over Germany, I could make out ribbons of highways snaking across the landscape, and when I stared hard, I could even see itty-bitty cars flowing along them. Where were the highways of Afghanistan? As far as I could tell, Afghanistan had nothing built by people. As far as I could tell, my homeland was an empty, barren country. The sight of all that emptiness began to alarm me. I stopped looking. I huddled in my seat, clutched my hands together, feeling the anxiety swelling inside me like a harsh bubble. All at once the plane banked into a sharp turn and at the same time began to drop rapidly. Planes coming in for a landing at Kabul airport had to go through such maneuvers at this time because they faced the danger of missiles shooting them down. In order to minimize risk, pilots stayed at the highest possible altitude until they were directly above the airport and then descended as steeply as they could, in a tight spiral within the ring of mountains surrounding the city. When we started our descent, I could not see Kabul because it was directly below the plane. I could see no sign of any city until we had descended quite a bit. Then, as the mountains rose up around us, I began to recognize them as the shapes I saw above our compound walls throughout my childhood. Moments later, we bumped down onto the airstrip. It was a sunny day. When I came out of the plane, I saw that the Kabul airport had just one landing strip, not many like the airport in Germany. Even on this single dinky little landing strip, weeds were growing from cracks in the concrete. Over to the side, I noticed a hunk of twisted machinery that might once have been a helicopter. And farther in the distance, I saw another couple of ripped and gutted tanks. I came down the steps, holding on to the rail, and saw the terminal, a little building to begin with, and now a falling down, broken-looking ruin. Inside, it was just one large empty room with unadorned concrete walls. The windows had no panes, leaving the whole chamber open to the elements. The floor had no covering of any kind, no tiles or carpeting. It was bare cement. Every sound boomed and echoed and rang in there. The lights, few in number and weak, barely diluted the gloom. And I thought, what is this? This airport is nothing, just nothing. How could this be? And I was thinking to myself, why is my country like this? We children returning from Germany were herded into several large vans. The same organization that had airlifted us out of the country now transported us to that same children's hospital from which they had taken me 2 years earlier. The sight of it made me flinch and stirred up feelings of dread in my belly. Apparently, the families had been notified beforehand that their children were coming home, for when we clambered out of the van, we saw clumps of people waiting on the other side of the parking lot. Here a glad shout rose up, there our jovial clamor. With each outburst, one child from our group and then another and another let out a happy, responding shout of recognition and went running or stumbling to his or her family. Steadily, the children melted away until only two were left, me and another girl. I thought, something happened to my family while I was gone. The other girl must have been thinking a similar thought. We both stood there, our faces growing longer and longer as apprehension tightened its grip on our hearts. But then, wait, who was that? Two taxis had pulled into the parking lot. My father and mother got out of one. My aunt, my sisters, and my brothers came out of the other. All of them had armfuls of flowers. I let out my own cry of joy and soon found myself swirled into the embrace of my family. So many had come to welcome me, and there was scarcely room in the taxi. I was stuffed in among them like cotton into a pillow. I forgot to say goodbye to that one other girl who was with me. I forgot to look back to see if someone had come for her. I just hope her family came soon. My family told me that they had been delayed by traffic. It was nothing serious, they assured me. Nothing serious. Everything back home was fine, they said, just fine. They began to fill my ears with family news. My aunt, for instance, had borne another child since I left, a boy, God be praised, but he was too young to come to the airport. One of the cousins was staying home with him. But all this chatter felt like pellets bouncing off me. I felt separated from this life. My head was still in Germany, and I only wanted to tell my family about the gleaming world, but I didn't know how to begin. Besides, I was already discovering something disturbing. I didn't speak Farsi very well anymore. I understood everything people said, but when I tried to express myself, my tongue felt clumsy and I often forgot crucial words. And then I got stuck and couldn't finish my sentence. How could I sink into the luxury of being with my family again if I could not even talk to them? Meanwhile, on our way through Kabul, as I gazed out the windows, I saw one damaged neighborhood after another. Walls broken down, buildings with shattered roofs, structures with missing windows, houses that looked deserted. We came at last to our own compound, which was intact, and yet it looked so different. But it wasn't the compound that had changed. It was my eyes. I was looking at my family's hard-worn home with German eyes. I stumbled through the gate into the yard and stared around me at the mud brick buildings. How small and squalid the whole place looked, and how enclosed. Instead of making me feel safe as they used to, as they still made my mother and no doubt my sisters feel, these high walls made me feel imprisoned. I felt as if I could not draw a proper breath in this compound. At once I began longing for space, for absence of enclosure, for freedom. We went inside the house. My mother brought out a box and opened it to show me a single thick braid of my own hair. As a little girl, I used to have long hair, but they cut it off at the hospital. My mother saved that hair, however. After I went to Germany, she looked at my braid whenever she missed me. The box had a worn look from being opened and closed so many times. My mother also showed me the grease spot in the bedding, where I had hidden that stolen cookie, another souvenir she had treasured throughout these 2 years. We all laughed about that stolen cookie, and we cried about it too, without quite understanding the meaning of our tears. Even if we sat about chatting and crying and laughing, I was glancing about me with growing discomfort. Our rooms were painted in the loud, bright colors that Afghans liked. This room was shocking pink, that one a vivid red, the one beyond it a bright blue. The rooms were all beautifully painted in accordance with Afghan tastes and customs. But to me, after being in Germany, these rooms seemed garish and cheap. Our home embarrassed me. I wanted the subtle hues, pastels of Germany. And the designs. In Germany, the interior design had been simple and quiet, and that is what I still prefer. Even now, here in America, I would decorate simply if it was up to me. but my mother likes floral patterns and bright colors. For her sake, we have glaringly colorful carpets and the brightest, busiest furniture we have been able to find. That's how our home in Kabul looked too. We were sitting on bright red mattress pads around bright red Afghan rugs woven in the usual intricate Turkoman patterns. And it wasn't just the colors and patterns that shocked my senses. We were sitting on the floor. We didn't have couches or armchairs. We had no tables, and soon my sisters brought out a long white cloth and spread it out on the floor. It was time to eat, and our food would be served on this cloth, on the floor. My mother served a festive meal that day, all the finest dishes in the Afghan repertoire. Baked rice with raisins and carrots, fried turnovers stuffed with Chinese chives, white pudding flavored with ground pistachio nuts, rose water, and cardamom. But I had lost my taste for Afghan food. I didn't like what my mother had cooked. I wanted German food, roasted meat, dinner rolls, plain vegetables, and I certainly didn't want to eat sitting on the floor. As for eating with my hands, from the same platter as my siblings, yuck. I wanted a fork and my own plate. Nothing about Afghanistan sat well with me. It all felt alien. Can this really be my home? I thought. My 2 years in Germany had changed me, you see. Of course they had. I was only 9 years old. Those 2 years represented nearly 1/4 of my life, and they were years of earthquake intensity. They had stamped my tastes indelibly. My family's way of life now seemed primitive to me, and oh my gosh, look at their clothes. They all wore baggy trousers, long shirts, headscarves, and turbans, traditional Afghan outfits. I was wearing the clothes given to me in Germany. Of course, I couldn't come back wearing the same clothes I had departed with. I had gone through that great growth spurt in Germany. At the age of 9, I had almost reached my full-grown size. I was just about as big then as I am today. The old clothes no longer fit me. But I also liked my German clothes, and I kept wearing them for symbolic reasons. As long as I wore those clothes, I was not really of this alien country. That's how I think I felt. Those clothes were my way of holding myself apart from Afghanistan. And of course, in holding myself away from Afghanistan, I held myself away from the only Afghans I saw in daily life, my family. To them, I'm sure, my alienation from all things Afghan seemed like snobbery, yet they never held it against me. Instead, they lavished the kindest consideration on me, the most extravagant affection. Everybody else in the family slept on cotton-stuffed mattress pads on the floor, but I was given a cot. I didn't like eating with my hands. Well then, the family went out and bought me some silverware. In that whole household, I alone ate with a spoon and fork from a plate of my own, while all the others gathered round the common platter and ate with their hands. And more often than not, I sat above them physically, for I alone sat in a chair. In the morning, they warmed up water and brought it to my bedside so that I could wash my face right there, even though the others all got up before dawn and performed their ablutions outdoors, with the customary cold water. All day long they catered to my every little whim as if I were some kind of star. Before my injury, when I was a little kid in this household, no one spoiled me. No one even noticed me much. I was just one more of the many children underfoot. Now they treated me as if I were some fragile creature in need of special handling. They did this out of love, I know, and because they had missed me, and because they were ever so glad to have me back. But beneath all their consideration, I saw something else. I saw pity. And I didn't like that. I didn't want pity. If less was expected of me, less was thought of me. That's how I saw it. I refused to concede that stepping on a landmine had made me any less than I used to be, or could be. I refused to scale back my ambitions or reduce my expectations of myself. So I didn't like this life. I wanted to go back to Germany, only I wanted to take my family with me. Of course, it was just not physical discomfort and cultural alienation that gave me bad feelings about Afghanistan. Constant fear played a part in my reaction too. As a child, I used to hear a lot of gunfire. I thought it was normal. But in Germany, I had grown unaccustomed to that sound. And besides, the war had heated up here in Kabul. Things had gotten a lot worse since I went away. Once my family felt I was ready to handle more serious news, they let me know that one of my uncles had fallen victim to the war. This uncle had one wife for several years, and he had some daughters by her, but she gave him no sons, so he married again. His second wife bore him several sons, and thus my uncle ended up with a large family. One day during a period when rockets were raining down heavily upon the city, and most people were staying indoors, my uncle's household ran out of food. Days passed, but the rockets kept falling. Finally, my uncle said, "Well, it's dangerous to step out of the house, but I have 2 wives now and all these children. If I don't go out and get some bread, my whole family will starve." So he made his way to the big Russian-built bread factory known as Silo. He was waiting at the bus stop with his arms full of bread when a rocket randomly landed on that spot, instantly turning both of my uncle's wives into widows and all his children into orphans. The younger wife remarried, but the older one remained a widow and lived with various relatives. One of her daughters later married one of my cousins, so she's living with her son-in-law now. In short, gunfire and explosion rocketed the city constantly at this time. On any random night, indeed, on most nights, at any random moment, you might suddenly hear a boom and crash. The family was used to it. They knew what to do. In the middle of the night, I would find myself woken out of the sound sleep by someone shaking me and muttering, "Get up, get up." "What is it? What's going on?" And booms would be resonating from somewhere outside the house. "Get up, we have to go to the bathroom." "Why the bathroom?" They didn't have time to explain. They just dragged me along. Eventually, I learned that we took shelter in the bathroom because it was a separate building behind the house and had no windows. The family considered it the safest place in the compound when rockets were coming in. Not a safe place, mind you, just safer. Therefore, at least once a night, we huddled in that bathroom until the sounds of explosions faded away. My family took this as normal life, but it kept me in agony. And over the weeks, it just ground my spirits down. I could not help dwelling on the fact that in Germany, you never had to worry about rockets. Days were relatively explosion-free. The rockets poured in mostly at night. One time, though, my cousin and I were sitting in a window seat, trading gossip and telling stories. In Afghanistan, the houses have thick walls to provide insulation against the winter cold and the summer heat, which makes for windows deep enough to serve as seats. My cousin and I were sitting on cushions in one such window seat, idling away the time when suddenly we heard that high whistling sound that a rocket makes when it passes overhead. An instant later, the entire house shook as the rocket landed right at the back of our yard, on the wall between our compound and our neighbors. It was just about noon when this rocket burst upon us. The explosion blew a hole in the wall between the yards and made the window pane next to us bulge inward. I happened to be looking up at that moment and saw the glass bulge, like a sheet of something soft, like something made of plastic. If the window had exploded into fragments just then, it would have killed us both. But instead, after pushing the glass inward, almost to the breaking point, the blast somehow reversed direction and sucked the glass back out. As it bulged back out, it burst into billions of glittering fragments right before our eyes, a powerful jet of jagged shards that sprayed across the yard. A few random fragments arced backward and hit us, but they landed harmlessly. Of course, this whole event took only a second or two. By the time we realized that a bomb had landed in our yard, the whole thing was over. Dust was raining down outside, the explosion was in the past. The noise just an echo and a ringing in our ears. But the fear slammed into us a half second later and we reacted to that delayed wave. Actually, I shouldn't say we. Everyone else reacted, not me. My parents, my siblings, my cousin, they all leapt to their feet and bolted for the hall because they knew from long experience that if you couldn't get to the outside bathroom, you had to get yourself into the hall. the one place in the house with no windows facing the outside world. They had been through this drill dozens of times. They knew what to do. I, however, froze. I couldn't move. My mother realized this and came running back for me. She grabbed me by the armpit, yelling, "Come on, run, flee!" I was terribling too hard to get up. She started dragging me toward the door. In trying to keep up with my mother, my foot caught on the rug and I fell. I banged my elbow against the ground and cried, "Ow!" As in America, that's what people say in Germany when they get hurt. Ow, for ouch. But in Afghanistan, when people get hurt, they say wak or akala. So even in that tense moment, I reacted as a German, not as an Afghan. And nobody knew what to make of the sound I had just made. Because in Farsi, as it happens, ow is the word for water. So my family thought I was calling for water. And what did my solicitous mother do? She started yelling at my siblings, "Get her some water, you lazy rascals. Can't you see Farah is thirsty?" And my brother Muhammad came running up with a big jug of water. I was yelling, "No, not that. Ow, ow." And my mother, still misunderstanding, began scolding my brother. "What's wrong with you? Do you think she wants to drink out of that big jug? That's not how they do it in Germany. Pour it into a glass for her. A glass." And I was all red with frustration and still yelling, "No, you don't understand. Ow." It made me angry that they thought I would issue spoiled demands and expect special treatment at a time like that. And it made me angry that my mother would cater to my errors, if that's what she thought them to be. That wasn't me at all. How could they misjudge me like that? Well, finally I managed to get across that I was merely trying to say, "Ouch, I hurt myself." At that, my mother renewed her efforts to get me into the hall, even though that was pointless. If a follow-up bomb had hit our house, we would all have been dead, whether we were sitting in the front room or cowering in the hall. This bomb had actually landed in our neighbor's yard mostly, but the neighbors happened to be in rooms on the other side of the house. Their chickens got killed. Their house sustained a little damage, but our neighbors escaped injury. After we sorted out what had happened, we laughed a lot over that episode. "Ow, ow, get her some water, you rascals." We were laughing at the time, but we laughed later. You have to take your laughs where you can find them. It's good to laugh when you can. Throughout this time, the streets were full of soldiers, skulking about with guns, loyal to various commanders. You had no idea who served whom. Sometimes they burst into people's houses and took over, although as far as I know, this never happened on our street. More often, if the soldiers came across an abandoned house, and so many houses fit that description in Kabul, at this point they swarmed in, claimed the place for themselves, and turned it into one of their encampments. Barracks of this type had sprung up all over the city, in all the neighborhoods. On some streets, behind every third or fourth door was a compound bristling with soldiers, and you never knew which ones. You didn't hear many gun battles on the street. By day, the soldiers patrolled their own neighborhoods and kept out of neighborhoods controlled by others. As twilight approached, these soldiers hurried to get indoors, and there they cowered and watched the skies, because they faced the same problem as the rest of us: rockets. Even in these conditions, my father went to work every day. He still made custom clothes for special clients and for people he knew and cared about when they had weddings coming up or other special occasions. But in a larger sense, my father's business had changed. Over the last 2 years, it had grown so much that you could not really call him a tailor anymore. No longer did he buy bundles of secondhand clothes to use as parts. Now he designed and produced ready-made clothes from scratch in a workshop of his own with 10 apprentices. He had developed into a clothing designer and manufacturer, producing goods in quantity. He made what people in Kabul called maxi dresses, women's garments with long full skirts. He made men's suits too, as well as jackets, vests, and winter coats. He cut out the parts, and his apprentices sewed them together according to his directions. You could find his products in stores all around Kabul, and they sold briskly, for they were every bit as stylish and sturdy as garments imported from abroad, but were so much cheaper. My father had his eye on expansion, on increasing his line, adding designs, acquiring more sewing machines, and opening another workshop. Even as war raged throughout the city, he was laying big plans and going to work every day, and we always watched him leave the house with our hearts in our throats, and we worried about him until he came back home at night. We had no sense that the war had any particular direction, no sense that anyone was gaining or losing ground, no sense that it would make any difference if anyone did gain or lose, no sense that the war could possibly move to any conclusion. Different armies held different parts of the city. That's all we knew. Word was going around that the Taliban were still approaching from the southwest, from Kandahar. They had gotten past Ghazni and were now advancing on Kabul. The Mujahideen, while still fighting one another, were trying desperately to hold off this new force. We had no special feelings about the Taliban, pro or con. They were just another army. People like us were just caught in the middle, trying to avoid taking sides, wanting no part of the battles, trying merely to survive work, live. We had no sense of a climactic moment or turning point coming up. One day's battle melted into the next day's. War was just the unremitting background against which daily life went on. And every day life did go on. It had to. No one had a choice about that. People had to go out and shop when they ran out of food or other necessary supplies. People had to go to work where they could. They had to make a living somehow. But we women and girls didn't go out much, not with the war raging and the streets crawling with random soldiers. And no one was going to school much in those last days of Mujahideen rule, neither boys nor girls. On most days, schools were closed because nowadays every day was a bad rocket day. I could not reconcile myself to this way of life. I talked to my father about it. I said, "This way of life is not for me. I don't want to live like this. I want to leave Afghanistan." I told him about Germany and all that I had seen there. And what could my poor father say? He worked his heart out and risked his life each day to make a life for his family. "Well, my child, this is the world," he would say with a sigh. "We just have to live in it and get by as best we can." I kept demanding to know why we Afghans had to be like this, fighting all the time, building nothing, clamping down on our own freedoms. What was wrong with us? My father had no answers. All he could do was elevate the rigors of my life, was to give me sewing lessons when he had the time. He hoped that this distraction would take my mind off the war. Later in life, I had good reason to look back on those lessons with gratitude. But at the time, I just plied my needle in silence and dreamed about Germany. 4 months after coming home, I was still wearing my German clothes, but my resolve was weakening. When I first found myself in Germany, I knew great loneliness because I could not communicate with anyone, and because I had no family or friends there. Here in Kabul, I suffered from loneliness again, but a loneliness of my own making. I had family, but I would not melt in with them. I refused to fit in. Gradually, however, I began to see that holding myself apart from Afghanistan was not getting me any closer to Germany. In fact, it did me no good at all. Instead, it cut me off from the only source of warmth and nourishment available to me in this life. I began to say to myself, well, this is where I live. Germany was a dream and a fantasy. I have to let go of that now. I have to accept reality. I'm going to live the rest of my life in Afghanistan, and I have to make the best of it. One momentous day, I concluded, it's over. I went to my father and told him, I will put away my German clothes. From now on, I am going to dress as an Afghan girl again. And although this was the moment when my defeated spirit surrendered to grim reality, it also represented the moment when I opened myself to my family again and let their warmth and love back into my life. My older sister, Nilufar, had extra clothes that would fit me, and I told my parents she had agreed to let me share them. My father would not hear of this. His prodigal daughter was really coming home to him at last. He said, no, you need clothes of your own. I will make you a whole new wardrobe. In Afghanistan, new clothes have importance. One of the things we do at the Holy Festival of Eid, for example, is get new clothes so that we can feel like we are starting over with new hopes and fresh dreams. This was the feeling of renewal my father wanted for me. Green hopes, new dreams, a fresh life. He told my mother, "Get the boys, go to the fabric bazaar, get her all the fabric she wants, whatever she wants, as much as she wants. Bring it home and I'll make new clothes for my daughter." Well, I went to the bazaar with my mother and my brothers. We spent the morning looking at fabrics, fingering this one and that one, discussing colors and styles and how much I would need of each of them. Using the language of clothes, we talked about a new life for me. And that day, we bought a lot of fabric, yards and yards of it. Having made my decision, I felt relieved and relaxed now. Something wonderful uncurled and began to sprout in my heart. Far away in some other neighborhood, guns were going off and cannons were booming. I scarcely noticed it, just as I scarcely noticed the growl of traffic, or the blare of horns, or the background hubbub of the bazaar. I had grown accustomed to the sound of war. It was just city noise to me. I had become an Afghan girl again.